Hello and welcome to another update. In this one, I'll be covering the latest developments from the front line, starting out in the Cremina front, where the Russian forces have managed to capture this part right here, as you can see on the screen with this picture from Syriac Maps, which confirms the developments here in this part of the front line. So the Russian forces continue their attempts at expanding the zone of control by the Rybyanka forest area, and here we also see that they are now closing in on capturing the full road. So there's this one road that goes through from the electrical substation all the way to the Cremina area, and they are now close at capturing the full territory. Then we also see some territorial changes by Klishchiivka, and here Syriac Maps has confirmed the complete control of Klishchiivka by Russian forces. So they have managed to push out the Ukrainians, but there's still heavy fighting going on right outside of the village as both sides continue fighting over it. Then we move on to the Zaporizhzhia Donetsk front, where here by the Remelsky Ledge area, the Ukrainian forces have managed to fully capture the village of Staromayorske. This is according to Deep State Map. According to Zodiac Maps, the Russian forces have withdrawn from the village, but the Ukrainians didn't fully hold it yet. But in my eyes, it would be the Ukrainians fully holding it, because the Russians withdrawing from it indicates that they are not in control of it, and the Ukrainians having a foothold in it would mean that they would very soon, at the very least, gain full control over it. So essentially now the next line of defense for the Russian forces is that they still have Yuroshine, then there's this Savitne Beshchanya village here south of Staromayorske. This indicates that the Russians will most likely choose to withdraw from Yuroshine, as they now don't have control over Staromayorske, and this would mean that they would use Savitne Beshchanya as the main village of defense. So essentially what this is that we see the river line here, which is actually somewhat wide in comparison to other areas. So the Russian forces can essentially withdraw fully from the eastern bank of the river line to Seremenivka, and then use the river line as their defensive line. And then they would have Kremenchuk, Donetsk, and Donetsk isolated from the rest of the Russian positions. However, the Ukrainians would have to drive through open fields to capture most of these positions. So as long as the Russian forces just hold fire control over the road by Seremenivka, and they are having some positions here in the east, then the Ukrainians would have a hard time capturing these villages to the east, but the Russians will most likely have to withdraw from Donetsk as well. So most likely the developments will be that the Russians will withdraw from Yuroshine, possibly also from Donetsk, and then they will hold some sort of defensive line through this road here, as well as the river line, and then they will try to hold their positions in the area and try to prevent the Ukrainians from advancing further. However, what is for sure is that the Ukrainian forces have increased the amount of assaults and the size of their assaults, which is why they are recently seeing more success in comparison to this last month. As for some footage for this area, there is two videos. The first one shows some smoke rising from some sort of IFV or armored vehicle in general, and another one abandoned and destroyed. So these two seems to be abandoned, both of them. Then we have this other video of another armored vehicle burning, and then it blows up. Then we move on to the Robotine area, and here there has been a lot of developments, as this is where the main push of the Ukrainian forces is said to be happening. First off, the Ukrainian forces managed to capture this part right here, which I reported on yesterday, but it is slightly further than I mapped out according to the latest Syriac map update. Then we also have reports that the Ukrainian forces pushed southwards from this position and are now going around to hit Robotine from behind, according to the latest information. So essentially they saw that the straight front head assault of Robotine was too difficult for the Ukrainian forces, so they decided to go around the fortifications and the high ground and attack from where the ground is leveled and behind the fortifications, so that they have a better chance at attacking the village. And the Russian forces are now fighting on this whole front in comparison to just one area prior to this. So essentially, the Ukrainian forces are going around the Russian defenses to try and push through. And at the same time, they were also pushing eastwards towards the other village of Verbove. And here we see that the Ukrainian forces actually managed to reach the first line of defense of the Russian forces with a major push with one singular tank that got lost and ended up by the front line and landed in the ditch, as per this video right here. So in this video here, we see a Ukrainian tank driving through this whole field and reaching the first line of defense, where there is the anti-tank ditch, where that is essentially, it's difficult to be seen from the perspective of a tank, so it probably didn't see it, so it's just driving through, and then it falls into the ditch and is just stuck there. So most likely the vehicle will be retrieved by Russian forces, and the soldiers will be taken prisoner, as this is fairly far from the location of the Ukrainian forces, and it is right in front of the Russian fortifications, which makes it difficult for the Ukrainians to retrieve this soldier and the armored vehicle. Then we also have this video here, which showcases an Lancet strike on a Ukrainian infantry fighting vehicle from both the perspective of a drone, but also the perspective of Ukrainian fighters in the area. So there's an infantry fighting vehicle by a forest patch here in the Robotine area, and it was struck by a Lancet drone, after which the second Ukrainian infantry fighting vehicle next to it drives up to it and rams it, as we can see from the perspective of both sides. And I'm not really sure what the purpose of it is. Maybe it is to move it out from burning the forest patch, which the Ukrainians are using as cover, or it could be to remove it out of the way so that it itself can push through. Then we have some footage here which shows many trenches by this part of the front line, and a few infantry fighting vehicles and armored vehicles in general attacking these positions, and then Russian anti-tank gun missiles, helicopters and so on, whichever they are, launching missiles against these Ukrainian infantry fighting vehicles and armored vehicles, destroying them from afar, while the Ukrainians are trying to hit some of these trenches where I don't really see any Russian positions located within these trenches, but there is some shooting from one of these fighting vehicles towards the side, northwest, which indicates that they may have spotted some, and then we see some larger explosions. But generally, there's a lot of heavy fighting in this part of the front line, and the Russians are most likely being pushed out of these trenches, which would be somewhere in this area east of Robotine. So what we are seeing across the whole front line is clearly that both sides are pushing it with their offensives. They have engaged with their main forces, the Ukrainian forces in the south, engaging with the main push through the Russian defenses, trying to push through. They have captured Staromayorsk. They're trying to go around Robotine and generally trying to push across the front line. The Russian forces have started with the beachhead. They are trying to push through in the area west of Svatove. There hasn't been any clear advances, but there's heavy fighting in this area according to the latest reports. And at the same time, there's a lot of back and forth at Bakhmut. So there's heavy fighting across the whole front line with many losses on both sides every day. And generally, we're not seeing that much progress. So the whole result of these offensive operations, which for Ukraine has been ongoing for 2 months, and the Russians have been ongoing for a couple of days, it is very unclear what is going to happen. But what we are seeing is that this is the most intense fighting since the start of the war. And that is going to be all for this update. Thank you for watching and have a great day.